I'm here today with Dr. Georges Verily, who studies archaeometallurgy. He, along with Frederik Rademakers, Claire Somaglino, and Patrick Degryse, recently published a paper in the Journal of Archaeological Science about the chemical changes that occur during the copper smelting process used in Ayn Soukhna, an ancient Egyptian site on the coast of the Red Sea. The team of archaeologists and workers excavated the site and used experimental archaeology to understand the chain operatoire, or operational sequence of smelting at Ayn Soukhna. What is it like studying archaeometallurgy? How can the excavation at Ayn Soukhna teach us about ancient Egyptian society?
Yeah. So I would like to say first that it's a teamwork. It's really important to understand that because we create a methodology and in experimental archaeology, but to understand the process is quite complicated for me. So I need more helps. And the first is Frederik Rademakers from Leuven University with Patrick Degryse, and they make the analyze, so the archaeometry. And then I have the help from Patrick, he's a master in art and in casting, and we work all the time together. So we find very new things from Ayn Soukhna, but it's a really teamwork. It's not just my work. I'm an archaeologist, but the rest come from the old idea that we share, and we create all the time the process together. So that's the first thing. So why archaeometry is maybe important? Because I think that if you like to understand a society, you need to understand the normal people first, because it's quite a problem when you study the old kingdom of the Middle Kingdom. All the time, you have the pyramid, you have the temple, you have the tombs, and so like this. Okay, that's very nice, but it's not the reality in the past. It's a part of the reality. We would like to understand also what do the normal people. And one of the activities is the metallurgy. And metallurgy is very important because for the Middle Kingdom, if you don't have metal, you cannot create some new things. So like art first, it's impossible to go to the mine. It's impossible to make good job in different fields. So like sculpture, so like woodcutter, so like the other work. So it's a really important part in the economic system and to change the society. It's why we would like to work on this. And also because it's very fun. You are always time in contact with the reality. You have furnaces, you have fire, you have water, you can create things. And so it's very exciting when you are on site because you don't understand anything at the beginning and you say, wow, that's very smart. That's so cool. But I don't understand. So it's exciting to go to the field. And so there's a reason why we work on this. And at the end, I would like to say that you understand how smart they are. Because, we have science for this moment and we use science, but it's not a good word in the past, of course, but they make also experimentation. They would like also to understand the process. They would like to do the best job as possible. And we can a little touch the knowledge. We can a little to understand the mentalities. And so this, you can understand the state control, but always time inside the system, you can also say, okay, but the workers, what they do, what's the knowledge? And they find always time good tricks to have the good result. They are quite lazy, but very smart if you're not lazy in the end. And so they create a shape because of this type of furnace, because they would like that the job is done by the furnace, not by the human. And so that's very exciting also that you can find a link between us and the past and always try to figure out the knowledge and the capacity that they have to create new things. And they are really brilliant at the end.
One of the interesting things that I really appreciate and enjoy about experimental archaeology like this is that a lot of people don't really think of history as a scientific field. Sometimes it'll occasionally be considered like soft science, but I think having things like the labs of archaeology and the experimental archaeology really shows that it can be just as scientifically rigorous as any of what you would consider regular STEM fields.
I think it's a responsibility when you are on the field to understand the digging, because you have one shot to understand what's happened. You cannot be back. And so when I start the job, I'm really shy and I don't know what to do. And so I start directly with experimentation, because there you can create things and you can destroy, you can restart, and you don't have any problem with this. And I think that's the main purpose from the experimentation is only to be a better archaeologist. It's not create an artifact. It's not to create a process. It's just to say, when I go back to the field, I pay more attention during my digging, because just for example, when you do the smelting and when the process is off, I do so like in the field. So I dig my furnaces and I would like to understand the whole thing inside. And after 10 smelting, I understand that the copper is always on the same place. So I say, okay, maybe this is important. So I pay attention when I go back to the field in Ayn Soukhna, and I find that you have only one tiny layer, less than 1 millimeters, but always I'm on the same place inside the furnaces. If you don't pay attention about that, you don't have this link. But experimentation give a better overview about details, because that's the reality. So if you try to do a good job in experimentation, after, when you go back to the field, you can say, okay, I must be careful on this part of the furnaces. I understand this small fragment there. I understand when you need water. Thanks to the experimentation, you can do a better job. And thanks to Frederik, you can analyze on the site. You can analyze after in the labs. And it's important because always time you come with new idea and they say, okay, I analyze this part and I find this. What do you think about it? And say, okay, but Fred, I think also that if you analyze that, maybe we can have new results also. Of course, I cannot make analyze. I'm not an engineer. I'm just an archaeologist. But if I understand the job from Fred and Fred can understand my job, at the end, yeah, we bring together a new idea and we find a lot of new things in Ayn Soukhna thanks to the teamwork.
So why was the excavation at Ayn Soukhna in particular? What's so special about it?
You know, the problem is that we have only the remains from the old society. So we don't have a real overview about Egypt. We have small fragment every time. Ayn Soukhna is a small fragment, but it's a very important fragment because this is the only site for this moment, of course, I say, but it's the only fragment that we have for the Middle Kingdom, for the metallurgy, for the whole process. It's just amazing. You have the old chain operatoire on the site. The remains is quite intact. You have the raw material. You have the material in using. You have the break material. It's just a dream for us. You must imagine that it's just amazing how many furnaces we have on the site, how many processes we have on the site, and we have quite an old chain operatoire for the first time for the Middle Kingdom. So we have the smelting, we have the melting, we have the refining, we have the using. So it's just incredible. It's just a dream at the end. You have a real photo about the process. And then what is also very nice is that it's a very short time. So that we are sure that for the Middle Kingdom, we have this type of process and not another one. In the other hand, you must be careful because that don't quite say that we understand the Middle Kingdom. That's just why I say that we understand, maybe, because science is this, huh? You can maybe come back in 5 years and say, George, what you say is totally wrong. Okay, that's science, no problem. Do the job. That's very nice. But for this moment, we hope that we can help a little and propose a chain operatoire, but it's only for the site. Just to understand, my boss, Pierre Tallet, is a very good professor. He initiates new digging along the Red Sea, and he works also in Sinai. In Sinai, we have a different process in the same time. So when you understand a site, be careful, you understand only this site, because we just have enough evidence for the rest of the metallurgy in the Middle Kingdom, but it's apart from the construction from the wall. So it's a brick for this moment. It's a very small parenthesis, but very, very intense and very amazing because we have a lot of good material for this process.
What are some things you learned about the furnaces and smelting processes at Ayn Soukhna?
The shape is directly on the site and always time the same shape is used. So if I said that they know what to do, we would like to understand that. And so like I say, we are really lazy. But so I say how to work if you are in the desert. It's quite hot. You don't have a lot of water. You don't have a lot of fuel. So what can I do if I would like to have a good process with the less effort as possible and the less fuel as possible? And so I go to the field and I see the furnaces. And what I see is that the furnaces is not alone. You have a wall. So that's why I said this is inside a workshop. But if you are inside of the workshop, you are out of the natural wind because you create an atmosphere inside without any interaction from the outside. So that's the first reflection. The second one is that the shape is very interesting. They are very huge, 1.30 m, and they have an L shape always time. And so I tried just at the beginning to put the fire inside and just to see what happened. Not from the real one, but I created an experimental one. And I put fuel inside, charcoal, and then fresh acacia. And I see what's happened. Just this, without any blocks. If you don't pay attention, you go to 1,200 degrees without any forced pot bellows like this forced system. You have a chimney effect inside. It's just so like a chimney for it. It's the same things. So that's why I say that, okay, you have a very good temperature and you don't work. The job is done by the furnaces. So after this, I try to put the blocks, and I see that the process go by himself. That's why I say that I just would like to show that they understand so well the chemical process inside, but they understand the application of this. Okay, they understand that you have stage inside. So you have first the malachite, then you have the cuprite, and then you have the copper. They understand that very well. So they design the furnaces not on 1 meter, not at 2 meters, but 1 meter 30, because you have the perfect way to have the chemical change during the process and to have the reduce and the copper purities at the end. So it's something that I take 5 years to understand this, with a lot of experimentation, thousands of hours of work to do that. But at the end, we are quite sure that if you take the old archaeological evidence, you understand that they can resume the process in one way, in one furnaces, and in one process, just because they understand the height, the diameter, and the type of fuel that they use and the type of blood that they use. And they have a brilliant result at the end, because we speak all the time about rentability, about efficient. The efficient is the path, so it's a balance between the fuel and balance between the ore. If you can find a good balance, and at the end you have the copper, you would like to reduce the whole 100% of the ore. No, if you have 90%, it's perfect, because you have a good balance. If you like to have that more, so like in modern time, you use so much fuel, that's too expensive and too complicated. So it's not the idea in the past. The idea is to have a good balance between the both and to have a good process, because you have the copper purities, you don't need a new effort after. So it's a balance between the efforts, between the fuel, between the ore, and find a system that you can do in one way with long time inside the chimney, and you can make the smelting.
So when you were doing your experiments, what were some of the issues that you came across and had to figure out? Were there any logistical issues or just problems that you came across in the experiment itself?
Of course, if you are in the better world in the world, you do the experimentation on the site directly. You try to do the experimentation not with the real archaeological remains, but with the same quality of material in the same condition. That's the best things to do. In Egypt, you know that sometimes it's not possible to make analyze easily. We don't have the time sometimes also, and you do the best as possible. You need to dig, you need to make the analyze, you need to make the photo, the 3D and so like this. So at the beginning, I start during the night to do the experimentation, and I find new things, but I would like to continue. And so for the post-study, for the excavation, I do that in Belgium and France. That's the reason, in Italy also. Of course, you have limits. I don't have the same quality of material in Belgium. But what is important when you have a strict protocol, and inside the protocol, we say, we would like to understand only this point. And you repeat the protocol a lot of time just to be sure that you have the same result. For example, the last one, we make 2 furnaces in Belgium, one for the charcoal and one for the fresh wood. And after 15 process in the same furnaces, 15 for the charcoal and 15 for the green wood, you can see that the linings are the same. We don't have the same color, of course, but the zone and the stratus is the same. The impact is the same. The vitrification is the same. So that's why I say that if you have a strict protocol and you don't like influence the protocol, you'll be very scientific in this way. And you can say, okay, when I go back to my site, I would like always time make a validation. If I have something different in the experimental process, just say, okay, it's wrong. So I restart a new protocol with new ID. In this case, we show that they use donkey donk and they use a fresh acacia and not charcoal for the smelting. And it's thanks to the vitrification, thanks to the colorimetry, thanks to the stratus, thanks to the radius blocks and so like this. So at the end of the process, we can have a good summarize of the process for the smelting, because the archaeological clue is the same that's the archaeological evidence. So archaeology show that we have no right. We have maybe 80% for the process. We don't know the time, we don't know the rentability, we don't know the human knowledge, we don't know about the more interesting things. It's not possible to show, but we can maybe say, okay, we have this type of process in Ayn Soukhna because we have validation from the archaeological evidence. It's not the same quality, but if you use, for example, we use malachite from Morocco, and we analyze the old blocks first, and with quite the same composition without lead, for example, inside the blocks. It's really important for the isotope. And so we make full of analysis during the process. And so we can say, okay, we are very linked between the two processes. It's a parallel that we create. It's not the same, it's really a parallel. So you must be strict, and the methodology is really important. If you have the time, maybe just to look at the methodology. But if you use a good protocol, a lot of time, muscle and money and so like this, you can maybe find something interesting for the process.
What was it like studying the lead isotopes and the copper? Was it helpful for you?
You know that in Egypt, it's not easily to make analysis. Huh? So you know that. So that's quite a problem with a lot of archaeological evidence on the site. Sometimes difficult to have the authorization. So that's the reason also that we use experimental archaeology, and we collaborate also with museum and with Luc Delvaux from the Musée Royal d'Art et d'Histoire from Brussels. And so there we can make a lot of analysis and work on the lead isotope. So in this case, the lead isotope doesn't come from the site. They come from the museum. That's a job from Fred. Fred's tried to create the starting point, because you know that we don't have a real good view about the mine in Egypt. You can take, of course, samples, but you don't know the samples from the middle, from the modern times, or for the Old Kingdom. We don't know. The vein inside the system is always a little different. So this complicates if you take two samples from the mine to say, okay, that's the lead isotope. We don't know. So what Fred would like to do is, with the sample from the museum, is to say, okay, we have a context and we can make a sure lead isotope analysis on artifacts. And we try to create the first step for this moment and make a link with the analysis that we have on the mines. But the link is not so sure. So we say that's a strong analysis from the metal and from the ore and so like this. And the link with the reality, with the geology, is for the future. We just would like to create the first step. So, of course, the lead isotope show that most of the production from the Old and the Middle Kingdom come from the cyanide. But what we show also is that in the Old Kingdom, the expansion from the state is very large, because you have the cyanide, but they go also in Israel, they go to Jordan and in Finland, for example. So they have more possibility to have copper in the Old Kingdom. And in the Middle Kingdom, show that the states, they go back to the cyanide, but only on the cyanide and only along the coast. The lead isotope in this case is really interesting, but you must be carefully, because we need more and more analyze to be sure about that. Another thing maybe interesting, we analyzed the dagger from Karma, and the copper come from the cyanide too. So that open also the idea about the change between the states and also the mobility of everything. So this is interesting also to see the movement and the mobility from the copper inside the system. That's the main result. And the other result, so like I say, is that when you don't have lead inside the ore, you need to be very carefully for the interpretation, because we show that during the experimental process without the same kind of ore, the lead isotope is not the same. And the gap between the lead isotope inside the graphic is so huge that in the past we say, okay, that comes from there and there and there. But now we can say, okay, be careful, because inside the system, if you don't have lead inside the ore, that can be the same ore at the beginning, but the difference is so huge during the chemical process that you have influence from other things. And so just be careful about the lead isotope. But it's only if you have no lead inside. If you have lead, that's not a problem. The lead isotope is very nice.
Copper artifacts don't usually come from just one piece of copper. How did mixing affect the isotopes? Did it make identification easier or more difficult?
I think that we are so strict in the protocol. We are so strict in archaeometallurgy that we think that you go to the mines, you take only one kind of vein, you come back to the smelting, you make the smelting, then you have pour the best copper as possible. That's the modern way. They go to mines, they take different kind of veins, and they come back to the site. They use the old type of veins and in the same phonesis at the beginning. So when you have this, you don't have one signature for the lead isotope. You have different print from lead isotope. And that's why I say that's the problem in antiquity is to produce copper, is not to have good lead isotopes like this. That's the modern problem. The reality from archaeology show that they use everything as possible. They mix everything. And so, of course, you have a kind of homogeneous copper at the end from cyanide. I say that the less isotope is a kind of print is not the best print that you can have. It's something that is a mixed print. After the smelting, that's the first problem. But also when you do the casting, the melting, you can reuse the copper. So the problem is always when you use a copper, you melt the signature, the print. And so I said at the end, of course, you have always time to create new things, but you have a medium print. And so you can follow the medium print during the process. The problem is more complicated after, because when you create the first tools, by example, the sites show that the copper is so rareful, so expensive, that they break the tools and that they reuse the tools so like raw copper, not so like a tool. So the problem when you have the recycling from Ayn Soukhna, but also recycling from Madi and from the south of Egypt, of course, when you melt everything, that's a real problem for us because the recycling creates a more gap between the red isotope. So we must be more smart. We must take into account the archaeological evidence and to say, okay, we have a limit. You don't have everything is under control. That's not the reality. Archaeology is life. And so the life is different, that science from the modern science.
If you could have one question about like ancient metalworking, just have it answered. Is there any question in particular that you would want to have answered?
What I like in the job is to have the Cluedo game. I like that, really. So maybe not an answer, but maybe just an interview with a master. Please help me. And what is new knowledge? What is your trick that you know that I can understand? This may be a link with the normal people, with the life, with the worker, and to say, you are so good, you are so smart. It's just possible to learn something from you. So maybe more an interview and be so like a little mouse with a video cam and to see what they do really and to see the master. Just this can be very nice.